Okay.
Hit play. Yeah.
Hit play. Hit play up here. Slideshow play.
There you
All right. How's that looking?
Beautiful.
Okay, great. And everyone can hear me. Okay. So here we go. This is a picture, by the way, by Scott Hess. And that's of some of our heritage oak trees. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, electrifying the grid versus nature-based solutions. As you all know, we're going to see a huge increase in energy demand. And the electrifying the grid does not automatically reduce carbon emissions. It requires decarbonization, which are examples of which are solar and wind. And grid decarbonization will be insufficient to meet our 80% emissions reduction target by 2050. And that's because of our growing housing stock and continued use of fossil fuels. And that's the National Academy of Sciences just put that out last year. In Petaluma, we are currently built out tenfold or 1,000% of our state required regional housing allocation numbers for moderate and luxury housing. And we are still approving single family homes and including on our river wetlands and grasslands, which sequester carbon. The carbon footprint of modern construction is huge. It's responsible for approximately 40% of all carbon emissions. So we are currently at an unsustainable pace of development, and in fact, it isn't necessary. In other words, we don't have to be exceeding our state required housing numbers. Okay. And here this slide shows nature-based solutions that can help us meet our targets. So nature-based solutions are strategies that take advantage of natural processes, and research shows that it can supply 30% of the climate mitigation needed to limit global warming by 2050. So that's an impressive fraction. What that entails is preserving and conserving our existing open spaces and upgrading our existing open spaces to better support native flora and fauna, and acquiring adjacent parcels to increase their effective size. And we can do that in a variety of different ways through easements, land use restrictions, purchasing via our open space district, via land trusts. SFEI has said that biodiversity declines rapidly when your green spaces are less than 10 acres. So to have this be an effective form of mitigation, we want to save large tracts of land. Okay, and so in fact, this isn't just my opinion or somebody else's opinion. This nature-based solutions to climate change are actually now at this point policy driven. Governor Newsom's passed his 30 by 30 executive order, which elevates nature-based solutions to combat climate change and build our resilience. We are in fact the first US state to join 38 other countries in this effort. And it's designed specifically to protect our open space, the environment, and biodiversity. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to optimize the role that trees, land, and water play in absorbing climate warming carbon from our atmosphere. And it calls for easements to conserve our lands, wetlands restoration, planting more trees, and creating more parks. Okay. So here are Petaluma's ecological assets. Our town is built on a watershed. We're bisected by a tidal slough. Our river is a major tributary of San Pablo Bay. It has fresh, brackish, and saltwater habitats. It's extremely unique. When you get above the transition weir that is part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flood control project, you are in fresh water. And so there are entirely different species there than there are in the mid region that are brackish and in the saltwater habitat, for example, down in the Turning Basin. The Petaluma River is home to more than 500 species of birds, mammals, fish, and insects. It supports threatened and endangered species such as the California clapper rail, the steelhead trout, Chinook salmon, and the salt marsh harvest mouse. The wetlands and grasslands within one specific area, the Corona reaches between Payran and Corona roads, and the wetlands and grasslands there are extensive. And it currently provides high value habitat, wildlife habitat for diverse species, including the gray fox and the red-shouldered hawk. And it's a critically important wildlife and migratory corridor. And wetlands are amongst the most productive ecosystems on Earth. So these are are something we need to be thinking very seriously about saving. And some of you may be aware that there's an award-winning nonprofit, which is the United Anglers of Casa Grande, and at the high school are restoring salmon and steelhead in our river. And they're a large hatchery, and they just took in tens of thousands of small fish fry that were imperiled further north, which there was a big article in the paper about. So why do we care about biodiversity? Because simply more biodiverse ecosystems store more carbon more securely, and they are far more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So water bodies such as wetlands, streams, and rivers serve as hubs for local biodiversity. So our first focus has to be on preserving the water bodies and the lands that support them. Reduced biodiversity leads to reduced ecosystem services and poses a serious danger for our food security. You've probably heard about the insect apocalypse. Half of the 1 million species facing extinction in the coming decade, so just 10 years, are insects. And insect diversity is critical for future generations. Why? Because insects are vital pollinators, they are recyclers of ecosystems, and they are simply the base of all of our food webs. And we are seeing significant declines both in birds and in small mammals because of the loss. Okay, what else did I want to say about that? Also, biodiversity positively impacts our human health in a number of ways. So the same human actions that drive biodiversity loss have resulted in an increase in pandemics. So when you have humans encroaching into natural areas, you see SARS, you see Ebola, you see things like that. Obviously, we don't have those two here, but we do have Zika down in the Louisiana, Texas area. And increasingly with global warming, we're going to see a lot more of these tropical type diseases. Okay. So what are ecosystem services? I call it nature to the rescue. If we keep our lands open, that provides for flood protection. Our Petaluma River is in fact very polluted. We are on the Regional Water Quality Control Board's list of impaired bodies. We have bacteria, fertilizers, pesticides, animal waste, and contaminants from stormwater runoff, as well as sediment in our river. Wetlands provide important water quality protection functions. So the way they work is that they literally, they slow sink and spread floodwaters, and they filter it. So they're super important for water quality, and they're vital as habitat. They're, as I think I said earlier, that wetlands are the most productive ecosystems on Earth. Grasslands sequester carbon, and in fact, trapping carbon in soil is the best known natural way of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. In California, grasslands, this is fascinating to me, but in California, grasslands store more carbon than forests, and that's out of UC Davis. They've found that grasslands are far more resilient to drought and fires than our trees are. And that makes grasslands much more adaptive to climate change than trees. Because of all these wildfires, our trees are starting to serve as a carbon source because they're releasing the carbon when they burn. And then per Helen Putnam's website, which I thought was great, 90% of California's rare and endangered plant species live in grasslands. So that's another important reason that we want to keep them around. And the one last thing I just want to say about grasslands is that they sequester the carbon underground. So that's the reason that they are more adaptive to climate change. It's much harder to have that be released. Okay. Whereas trees store their carbon in their leaves and their woody biomass. So this is a fantastic graphic that Christina Toms of the Regional Water Quality Control Board shared in a prior presentation through Know Before You Grow. And all you really need to do on this graphic is just look on the upper left, and you see where we're number 6 up here, where my hand is going. Number 6 up there. This gives you a really good sense of why we're going to be impacted by sea level rise. So the dark blue that you see is our current mean sea level. And then if you look down in the legend, you can see that the lightest blue is the most dangerous. That's 150 centimeters of sea level rise for a 100-year storm. And then the medium blue is a 50 centimeter rise. And then the slightly darker blue is the 25 centimeter sea level rise. So this gives you a great overall sense of all the towns that are going to be impacted, of which we are one. And Napa, by the way, has undertaken a huge flood control project, which if you go and spend any time there, you can see that. So they're really taking it very seriously. So Petaluma and flooding. We flood every year. Rivers are meant to go over bank. It's critically important. A healthy river is a serpentine river. So it looks like a snake, and you want it to go over bank because it's distributing the sediment and the water when it goes into the areas between the river. And that creates enormous habitat. It also filters out sediment so it doesn't end up in the river channel, so that we wouldn't have to dredge if we hadn't straightened the river and all of its tributaries over time. But we did, and so we have to. So rivers are meant to go over bank because they filter contaminants. They recharge groundwater, which is a very, very limited and critically important resource in Petaluma, especially for rural Petalumans who are on wells. To manage our flooding, we built a $100 million flood wall. Actually, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did, and they paid about $40 million for it. And I do not know exactly where the other monies came from, but some of it was public money. Most of the town is not behind a flood wall. So with sea level rise, things are going to get much, much worse. You've probably heard me say that Sonoma County is #1 out of 11 Western states and 414 counties in flood losses to the tune of $5 billion. That's a study that Scripps and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did in 2019. And what they found was, even though Washington and Oregon get a lot more water than we do, a lot more rain, we build so much infrastructure in vulnerable locations that we have massive losses. We also topographically sit at the peak of landfall for atmospheric storms, which are severe weather events. So that gives us another profound disadvantage. So climate change is going to bring much more extreme storms. And you might hear people say, yeah, but we're not getting any rain. And as Christina Toms at Regional Water Quality Control Board said, we might get less rain overall, but we're going to get it in really intense bursts. And that's going to be what is going to damage our infrastructure. Okay, so let's go on to that. So this is just to show you well after the flood wall went in. This is up at the outlet malls. We flood upstream all the time. Washington Square, Denman Reach, Lindbergh Lane down to the south, right where opposite Amy's and Scannell property is going in. So I want to talk about an area that I'm hoping can be preserved, and it's called the Corona Reach. And this is a large landmass area between Payoran and Corona roads. It's largely undeveloped. Per our current general plan, it's the largest and most environmentally sensitive segment of our river. It contains the last remaining matrix of wet meadow, vernal pools, mature riparian forest, and in-stream habitat of the main stem Petaluma River. There are native willows, oaks, and alders that provide critically important habitat for the diverse wildlife found there. Our policy documents are Petaluma River Access and Enhancement Plan, which was city adopted in '96, and our general plan call for preservation and enhancement of the ecosystems here. And as the head of the Petaluma River Council, David Keller, would say, and he was a prior city council member, this provides us with a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get this right and save this land. It's under great threat from the Rainier Connector and the massive planned developments that would accompany that along the river. And critically, development here would commit our non-renewable resources, habitat, groundwater infiltration, flood storage capacity, carbon sequestration, and healthy river flows forever. Okay, let me just see. Whoops. Okay, sorry about that. So here's a fantastic picture of the Corona Reach in the summer for any of you who may not have been up there. And Taryn has been helping popularize this and lead some groups of people up there. It's really beautiful. Stephanie Bastion of the Friends of the Petaluma River, they take the Vamos Afuero kids up there because at high tide, you can get up there in a kayak. So that's a good picture of it in the summer. Here's a picture of it in the winter. I don't want to say about that yet. And then my next slide is going to show you our river and its phenomenal functions. So this is a great picture in the Corona Reach of, you can see the 101 in the far distance at the top of the slide, and you can see the train tracks just to the left. And then you can see these gorgeous seasonal wetlands in here, and you can see the river just in the background, serpentine in behind it. So here you see both the ecological and flood functions at work. It's acting like a sponge, it's sinking, it's spreading, it's slowing our floodwaters. It's creating vital habitat, it's recharging groundwater, it's filtering contaminants. However, this beautiful area, this actually exact parcel is under imminent threat of development. And I'm going to show you the overlay. This is what was approved. This is the Sid Commons development. Now look how they shoehorned this in here between the river and the train tracks. And what happens is, whoops, you can't, the area can't perform these flood functions if they're cemented in. So this project is currently approved, but it's under litigation. If it goes ahead, it will lead to massive further degradation of the ecosystem services that these wetlands and vernal pool grasslands provide. And unfortunately, there are many more projects like this that are planned for these wetlands and grasslands, despite this being vital wildlife habitat and providing critical flood protection for our town. So again, I go back and just show you, that's what it looks like now. And that's what's planned for it, as well as all the R4 grasslands on the other side are planned for development. Another threat is the Rainier Connector. This is a 40-year-old thinking. It's actually 50 years old that they've been trying to get this in. So you're basically extending an arterial roadway into a previously inaccessible area, which represents a massive commitment to future urbanization in this area. As we all know, building more roads is not a viable solution. It doesn't comport with vehicle miles traveled, and it won't help us reach our climate change goals. And in fact, the traffic studies show that Rainier would provide very little relief at great cost, both to the environment and fiscally. The planned development that houses the additional roads and commercial facilities for the Corona Reach area would mean the loss of 100 acres of land within our floodplain, and acres of wetlands would be destroyed. This can never be restored. And the United Nations has said that stemming land degradation is the key to keeping temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius in accordance with the 2015 Paris Agreement. So for anyone who doesn't know or isn't familiar with the Rainier Connector, it would have its massive concrete footers squarely in our wetlands, and we would have to remove all of the trees in order to accommodate it going over. So we're looking at least 65 heritage oaks that would be taken out. It's highly unlikely wildlife would use this area anymore with all of this human encroachment. Okay. So we have a tremendous ecological restoration opportunity here. Our river ecosystems are severely degraded. Per the San Francisco Estuary Institute, we've lost 98% of our wetlands. These profound changes have resulted in decreased ecosystem services such as flood storage, groundwater recharge, habitat, water quality, to our detriment. Our major policy documents call for us to conserve and preserve these upper river ecosystems. And as I've said, we have major wildlife habitat within our urban growth boundary. So we have to ensure that species have the habitat they need to survive. In other words, there's only one river, and the wildlife are going to be drawn to this river to use it for their survival. So that's why, even though it's in the urban growth boundary, that's why it's so important that we protect it. With droughts, the Resource Conservation District has said that streamside forests and wetlands are going to be under a great deal more pressure to provide water and wildlife habitat. So what can we as citizens do? A couple of things that come to my mind. One is we could create the Petaluma River Trail with several nature parks along this spine of the Corona Reach. We can tell our city council leaders that we don't want development in the parcels adjacent to the river. Let's instead create a pedestrian and bike trail that was proposed 25 years ago. This call for this bike trail is what the Petaluma River Access and Enhancement Plan, the access part is this bike trail. And the enhancement part is about restoring the woodland riparian forest there, as well as putting more of the oaks and the oak savanna there. It's 6.5 miles. If we actually had it on both sides of the river, we'd have 13 miles of trails in our urban core. So Ramey and Associates, our current consultants, have shown that every single census tract in Petaluma is adversely impacted by traffic emissions. This shortens our lifespans. It contributes to asthma, cancer, neurological, and immune system effects. This trail would provide a carbon-free recreation in the middle of our core. It would provide relief from heat islands. It would preserve all of this open space and biodiversity. It would sequester carbon and protect us from flooding. And importantly, it would connect to regional trails to the north to Sebastopol and Pengrove, so that people could really go from their houses to these trails, whether they're disabled and in a wheelchair, whether they're on a bike or they're walking, and they wouldn't have to use their car to go out to, for example, Point Reyes or something of that ilk. We could also build more developments that don't have parking associated with them, because people would have a way to have recreation without having to get in their cars. So this is a graphic depiction. It gives you such a great overview. If you look at all the brown areas, these are the grasslands and wetlands that we're talking about. If you look down in the far lower right of the slide, you can see the existing trail. It's a very tiny little cream colored trail, but we have that, in other words, up behind the Oak Creek apartments. And what the river plan calls for is to continue this trail all the way up. Now, when you see it up at the top and the left, that's the outlet mall up there that it's having to squeeze behind. So that gives you an example of what happens when people encroach on the river and come in like that. It doesn't leave any space for any of the ecological or the flood functions of the river. What's another thing that we can do? Well, I'm a co-founder along with Wendy Jacobs, and we have a number of super sharp people on our group as well, of ReLeaf Petaluma, which has John Shribs, who's head of the tree group, and David Powers, and Michelle, and Delinda, and Bonnie, and I'm sure I'm forgetting other critical names. And so our suggestion is that we restore and enhance our river ecosystems with native vegetation. Why native? Because I love my roses. So why native vegetation? Because native plants bolster the entire food web by supporting native insects, which are in turn a critical food resource for wildlife. Native plants reduce water usage and maintenance costs. If you think about the California lilac, which is the ceanothus, you know that it doesn't want any summer water. Otherwise, it will die at 10 years instead of 20. I just put in some California wax myrtles. I watered them twice and never again. And they are evergreen, meaning not evergreen like an evergreen tree, but they stay green. And they're really beautiful, and they are not requiring any water. So per USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, the Forestry Department, Petaluma has really sparse tree canopy cover. I was really surprised to see that. Trees can reduce temperatures by up to 35 degrees per the National Geographic. Our river plan that I've been talking about, this access and enhancement plan, was vetted by 25 scientific agencies, and it was paid for by the California Coastal Conservancy. It calls for restoring the woodlands along our river and putting in a lot more oaks in our grasslands. So the group that I'm part of, ReLeaf Petaluma, has a goal of putting 10,000 trees in to enhance our urban canopy. And my other suggestion is something you all are know a great deal about, and that I'm just getting up to speed on, which are the complete streets. In other words, let's get out of our silos and work together to work with planning to get streets designed with trees, to work with the water folks so that we don't have the tree roots, in the sewer and the water systems, but we design together. And so I'm going to show you a picture of the USDA's tree canopy cover just to show you. Petaluma is in the middle of the map. What you want is bright yellow and green. You don't see much of that in Petaluma. You see a tiny little sparse patch. So who's got us beat? Sonoma's got us beat. Napa's got us beat. Look down in San Rafael, incredible. We more resemble Vallejo and Richmond than we do any of these other areas. So we're missing a tremendous opportunity here for carbon sequestration and for retaining stormwater and for creating habitat. Other cities have done this. These are two really good examples of river preserves. I'm going to botch this name. Does anyone know how to say this word, Cosumnes? Is that correct? I don't know. So this is a river preserve up in the Sacramento San Joaquin area. It's incredible.
The Consumnes River.
Thank you. It's got 10 miles of trails. So remember I said we had 6.5 from the downtown up to the Denman Reach, which is up where Redwood Highway is. We have 6.5 distance. They have 10 miles of trails. They've got hiking, paddling, wildlife viewing, and they've got a sensitive wetlands walk, which is what we'll need to do if we can create some of these parks. It provides permanent protection of the floodplains, wetlands, valley, oak, riparian forests, and vernal pool grasslands. It sustains a dynamic mosaic of habitats that support native plant and animal species. It provides economic, social, and recreational benefits. So let me just see what I'm doing here, make sure I want to tell you anything else about this. And the other example that's tremendous to look up is the Boise River Greenbelt. They've got 25 miles and they've got a whole bunch of parks along that length of the river. So really tremendous examples. In other words, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We could borrow. Helen Putnam, I found this fascinating. I was looking on their website. If you look at the first bullet point, they say parks are the first and best line of defense against climate change. I thought that was really impressive. And it's for all the reasons you would expect, that it acts as a refuge for biodiversity, and that they play a role also in interpreting climate change for residents and visitors, raising awareness and shifting behaviors. And I have the link there, and I can always give Annie or Natasha copies of these slides if they'd like. So, because I realize it's going to be hard to get all these links. So this is my call to action. Talk to your city council members. We absolutely need people to sign up and speak at meetings. There's a small group of us that have been doing this for a couple of years, and Mayor Barrett fondly refers to us as the frequent flyers. So we definitely need more people to show, and I think a groundswell is building, but we really need people to show up. And if you would, and if you believe in this, please tell them that we don't want development in this most sensitive river segment that's been designated as such in 2 of our major policy documents in this area known as the Corona Reach. And ask the council to decertify Rainier. And a lot of folks may not know this, but when David Keller and Jane Hamilton and Matt McGuire and Janice Cater Thompson were in our city council, they previously decertified Rainier. So we can take it back out of commission. We can focus our efforts on the Caulfield and the Corona connectors, and we can not destroy this river. So, and obviously where I am a pesticide scientist, I would recommend that you don't use pesticides and that we plant native vegetation for all the obvious reasons. And Veronica wanted me to mention that on October 22nd, the comments on the general plan are due to the consultants. So if one did nothing else, perhaps by this Friday, you could just go and say that you're opposed to development in the Corona Reach, and that you would like the council to decertify Rainier. Finally, there's an effort, a legal effort to try to stop development in the river wetlands that's being carried by a few citizens, and they could use some help. So you can find this by going to just GoFundMe Petaluma Wetlands. And that is currently under appeal with the California Court of Appeals, from what I understand. So these are all the references. The top one is Gina's Take Action Petaluma video. It was filmed by an award-winning filmmaker. I recommend it. It's really short. It's just tremendous. You'll see Gina in it. She's just put out a tremendous effort to help this river effort. The second one is a drone video of our seasonal wetlands in the Corona Reach. It's really tremendous. It shows in the winter when things are green, and all the water that's on the land. So it's, you know, how we're all feeling about this recent rain. It'll make you feel good. ReLeaf Petaluma, obviously I'm going to plug my organization here, that Wendy Jacobs came from the East Coast and got us all fired up and got us started on this. And she is, has approached the city council to try to get them to accept the 10,000 trees proposal. So we're hoping that the city council will approve that. And then you'll see that SFEI did a phenomenal report. I think it was in 2018 on our hydrology and ecology in the Petaluma watershed. That's there. They have a brand new document out on making nature cities where they talk at length about protecting creeks and wetlands and rivers. And then here's our river access and enhancement plan for all those who might not know that that was city adopted in 1996, and this needs to be carried forward into our next general plan. And then finally, there's the UC Davis link, which talks about how our grasslands in California are more reliable carbon sinks than trees. And I think that's the end. I might have one quote. Oh yes, I like Mr. Sir David Attenborough of the BBC, who says the natural world on which we entirely depend is declining at a rate faster than at any time since the global catastrophe that exterminated the dinosaurs. We know where this story is heading. Thank you. That should be the end.
That was fabulous, Moira. Thank you so much. And speaking of natural resources, you're clearly one of the one of our community's wonderful natural resources. So I really appreciate that. That was so informative.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, very, very helpful. I'm going to, if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we can have a little discussion.